Hello readers, I'm Amy, here today to bring you some of my favorite authors. These are not necessarily my all-time favorite authors, these are more authors that I've been enjoying lately, and also each of these authors has more than just one or two books that I have read. So let's go ahead and get started. I have a nice pile right here because I wanted to grab all of the books that I owned by each author. And now I'm kind of wondering why I would torture myself like that. But anyways, let's get started with some Meg Wolitzer. So Meg Wolitzer I first came across by chance. I believe I found the Interestings at one of the Friends of the Library book sales, and it has a rainbow stripe cover and was apparently about artists, so of course I had to get it, having used to have been an artist in high school myself. So The Interestings starts out with a bunch of kids who meet up at this art camp, and then it kind of goes through their lives together, how things have changed for them, who did well, who didn't, how they interact with each other, and it's kind of a life story of all of these kids as they grow up and have relationships and everything, and it was really interesting. It was also one of the first books that I read that had a psychological angle to it. One of the characters, if I remember correctly, is experiencing some pretty serious depression. And I think one of them becomes a therapist. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute since I've read this book, but I did really, really enjoy it. The second book that I own by Meg Wolitzer is The Female Persuasion. If I remember correctly, this is her most recent release. Again, it's got this awesome kind of rainbow stripy cover. This is about a girl who goes to college and listens to a feminist speaker one day and becomes obsessed with her, really wants to go and work for her, and it's showing kind of different layers to feminism. You have women building each other up and women tearing each other down, and just showing these different layers to the female relationships, and that was really interesting to see. The other book that I have read by her that I don't own is The Position. That's not one of my favorites of hers, but I think the idea for it is still really, really interesting. It's basically about the children of people who wrote what is essentially a fictionalized account of the joy of sex. So imagine the people who wrote the book, The Joy of Sex, having kids and then hearing the kids' story. That's basically what the book is about. And to come up with that idea is really, really interesting. Another book of hers I really want to read, or at least it is on my to-be-read list, is The Wife. And it's been so long since I put it on my list that I don't even remember what it's about, but I hear good things. I really need to pick that one up soon because it's been on my Goodreads list, like I said, for a while. Long enough that I can't remember anything about it. Next set of books, I'm just going to start taking from the top. Daphne du Maurier is an author I have become obsessed with in the last year. I had not read any of her previously. She's kind of more of a modern classics author. And I ended up picking up Rebecca at a Friends of the Library book sale. This is a really pretty hardcover copy, and I loved it. It's this woman who, she's kind of like a maid to this lady or something, and ends up meeting this guy, and they fall in love and get married, and that's when she learns about the other wife, the dead wife, because the guy is a widower, and she's just finding out all these dark things about the wife, or she's really mysterious. All of the servants in the mansion that she has now moved to just look up to the old wife and don't really want anything to do with the new one. And it's this kind of gothic thriller mystery. I really loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. I think the next one that I read was Don't Look Now and Other Stories, which really sealed the deal for me with Daphne du Maurier, because I don't really enjoy short story collections. I'll read a short story here and there, but I generally like things a little bit longer. I don't find complete collections that I love, and I truly enjoyed every single story in Don't Look Now and Other Stories. There was I think one out of here, there's 4 or 5 stories in this, and there was one that wasn't my favorite, but I didn't actively dislike any of them. I enjoyed reading every single one, and that is not something I think I have ever said, ever, about any short story collection. So that on its own told me Daphne du Maurier's got something to her that I like. Next one that I read was My Cousin Rachel. So far of my readings, this is probably my least favorite, which still isn't saying a lot, because I think this was a 3.5 or 4-star for me, if I remember correctly. This one, a guy is raised by his cousin, and as his cousin gets older, he goes off to Italy in the winters to kind of take care of his health and everything. And this kid has been brought up to believe that he doesn't need marriage, he doesn't need a woman in his life, they're fine on their own. And then his cousin comes back from Italy married, without saying anything about this woman that he'd supposedly fallen for, without inviting his little cousin over to the wedding. He's suddenly married, and then he very quickly dies. Did the new wife kill him? Did she not? It took so long to get to that part of the story, I don't actually remember how it ended, and it makes me want to pick it up again. Which is another thing to note about Daphne du Maurier. I have never been a slow burn book person. I am very naturally impatient. I don't wait for anything. I don't wait for anybody. And Daphne du Maurier makes me wait. She is the first author that I've read a slow burn book from that I've enjoyed, and I've really enjoyed a lot more slow burn books since starting to read Daphne du Maurier, so she's taught me an appreciation of the slow burn book, and this was one of them. The next book I'm going to read by her is The Birds and Other Stories. This one I just recently saw the movie by Alfred Hitchcock and did not expect some of the scenes in there, considering it's a movie old enough to be in black and white. I just don't think of those movies as particularly gory looking, I guess, and the movie caught me by surprise, and I'm like, I really need to read that book. So this is another short story collection, and because of Don't Look Now and Other Stories, I have pretty high hopes for this one. I'm hoping to get to it in the next month or so, but I also have a lot of books that I'm hoping to get to in the next month or so. So we'll see how that goes. Next author is also a modern classics person, and that is Ira Levin. So before I talk about him too much, yes, I have only read his two most famous books, Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives. But hear me out. I started off reading The Stepford Wives in high school. I only got about halfway through it and just wasn't for me. I wasn't really into the writing. I watched the 70s version of the movie and it creeped me out, and wasn't too keen on the story because it creeped me out so much. Watched the Nicole Kidman movie a couple years later and really liked it because the ending made me feel more comfortable. And by the time this video is up, I should have my Stepford Wives review up. So I will link that in the corner so you can get more of my thoughts on that. But I did recently buddy read this with Hillary from Melted Books, and I loved it. I liked being uncomfortable in that I know that you're supposed to be uncomfortable when you read this story. You're supposed to learn from it, and I did, and I loved it. His writing style is fine for me now. I don't get what issue I had with it previously. Really enjoyed this. What inspired me to pick up The Stepford Wives again was reading Rosemary's Baby last October for Halloween. Again, really enjoyed this. Which I didn't say it before, but The Stepford Wives is about a woman and her family who move to Stepford, and the wives are very housewifely in a very weird way, and it creeps her out. My channel being rather feminist, myself being rather feminist, that book freaked me out. Rosemary's Baby is about a newly married couple. The woman becomes pregnant, her new neighbors are acting really, really weird, and may or may not be part of a satanic cult. Again, this is a shorter book. It's not a novella like Stepford Wives, but it's not even 250 pages, so it's a nice quick read. It's very interesting. I don't know that I'll ever read the sequel to it. It was written by the same author. I don't know how many years afterwards it was written by the same author, but I haven't decided if I'm picking that one up yet. I kind of like that we just got the bit of the story that was in here. And I have picked up 2 more Ira Levins because I enjoyed these 2 books so much, and these ones I am also equally interested in. The Boys from Brazil is a thriller about Dr. Joseph Mengele from World War II, as you can tell from the swastika put onto the front cover. And they're trying to create the Fourth Reich, It's some kind of sinister project. This sounds really, really interesting. And then this one, hopefully I will have read it by the time this video comes up, since I'm doing some pre-filming and prep for college. Woman meets a handsome young man. They're supposed to be married, but Dorothy's pregnant, and their financial plans could be ruined because of this. So the young man provides his bride-to-be with some pills that will solve the problem. Soon there will be no baby, and perhaps no Dorothy either. I can't wait to see how this one turns out. Ira Levin, with his two most well-known books, has got me hooked, and hopefully I'm going to stay there. Next up, my big collection that I've got growing here. Brandon Sanderson! I never thought I would say that, because I am not a fantasy channel. I don't talk a lot about fantasy. I don't read a lot of fantasy. But Brandon Sanderson has got me now with fantasy. I heard enough about Mistborn that I decided to go ahead and pick it up, and I ended up loving it so much that I got my favorite covers, which I would have liked it better if they were all floppy paperbacks rather than hardcovers, but still, I love this artwork. I was obsessed with this series. I know I'm probably not going to read the second trilogy in this series because they're more like kind of westerns. I'm not a huge western person. I'm actually not a western reader at all. But anyways, loved Mistborn, and I did end up picking up Elantris, which I believe was Brandon Sanderson's first full novel. I also have my eye on Warbreaker, and I have promised one of my friends that I'm going to read his novella series. I believe it's called Legion, at some point this year, because they're novellas, and it's my goal, one of my goals this year, to read more novellas. So, very excited to see what else Brandon Sanderson has in store for me. As much as I am enjoying Brandon Sanderson, I will not be reading his newest series until most, if not all of it, has been published, because I prefer to read a series one after the other. I don't want to read a book and then have the next book come out in 2 or 3 years and have to reread the book to catch up, especially since those books are like over 1,000 pages a piece. I have only probably read 1 or 2 books in my life that have been over 1,000 pages. So I am waiting on that series until it is done. Next up, Meg Ellison. Again, I will link a review in the corner for her Road to Nowhere series. I talk about this series on my channel all the time. It is a women's dystopia series. The women of the world die in pregnancy and in childbirth. The world is very short on women, and Meg Ellison is basically exploring all of these different cultures, all of these different towns, and how they have survived after the apocalypse, essentially, without as many women. And it's very interesting. I love what she did with this. They're fairly short-ish books, like it's not a huge series like a fantasy series would be. And she has a new book coming out in August. I am determined to get my hands on an arc, and it's about a girl who, if I remember correctly, she ends up... Oh, she does a project on mold for her school by taking samples from around her house and has CPS called on her family. And working in a psychiatric residential treatment facility myself, I'm very interested in that story. I think that if it goes really well, the kids that I work with would also really enjoy it. I can't wait to see what else Meg Ellison comes out with. Last one is more, I felt like I really needed to have some nonfiction on this list, though she hasn't come out with anything for the last couple of years. Her newest book is 2016, so I'm sure she'll come up with something new again. But as for favorite nonfiction author, I don't have a ton of favorites for nonfiction, because I haven't read like the full collection of most nonfiction authors. So as far as huge collection from a nonfiction author, the only one I really have for you is Mary Roach. I have read every single thing that she has written. I have all of her books. I don't have Stiff in this collection because I have it on my Kindle, but I do want to get a physical of it. On my Kindle, I also have, is it called My Planet? It's like a collection of her Reader's Digest columns. They are hilarious. Highly recommend. Also a very, very quick read. Here we have Bonk, which is her book where she researches sex. Spook, where she researches ghosts and ghouls and techniques for finding them. Packing for Mars, which answers some very interesting questions that you didn't know you had about traveling in space. Gulp is probably my least favorite of hers, but still one I really enjoyed. It's about the digestive system, and she takes part in a cat food tasting test in this book, which is very interesting to see. And Grunt, The Curious Science of Humans at War. Again, answering questions about war that you didn't know you had. This actually has like a chapter or two dedicated to how they do research for their clothing materials. Not something I ever really thought about, but I loved learning about it. And again, I cannot wait to see what else she comes up with. I really want to get a physical copy of Stiff, which is her research on cadavers, which, thanks to her, I've also become very interested in death research. Her and Caitlin Doughty, just... Caitlin Doughty is almost a favorite nonfiction. I want to read her third book and decide, because I wasn't too hot on From Here to Eternity, because it was missing a lot of the personality of her memoir, but her memoir, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, was amazing. So if I end up liking Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs, she'll probably be my other favorite nonfiction writer. But that is it for this video. You now have a list of some of my fairly recent favorite authors. Again, this isn't like a full list of all of my favorite authors ever by any means, just some recent favorites. And because I dragged all of these books out, I might as well try for an interesting thumbnail and a funny attempt at actually picking these up. Where's the... okay. Ta-da! I did it! Yay! Awesome. Okay, one of these will be the thumbnail, I'm sure. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. I post every Wednesday, Sunday, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye, friends.